What's up, man?
Hello.
Hey, man, can you hear me?
Oh, I can't hear you. Hey, try leaving and coming back.
All right, hold on a
Just
second.
refresh the page. Unless it's me. I mean, obviously. Yep. Hello.
All right, how about now?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. I mean, it makes sense that it works for you if it works for me.
All right. Yeah, fucking. As soon
Sorry,
as
it
I
takes you.
clicked out, it Firefox had to update something, so I had to wait.
Ah, shit. Yeah, I know. I had a feeling as you were doing it. I'm like, just hit refresh and hopefully it won't take a long time.
No, as soon as I clicked out of it, it said Firefox needs to refresh, needs to update whatever the thing. So I had to wait for that.
All right. Well, what did we say we were going to talk about again? CBDC, OPSEC a little bit, but not to steal the thunder out of Magnus's episode.
The world burning down.
No, what was it? It was like obviously the Texas thing. No, but before that, what was the other thing?
Civil War, CBDCs, and OPSEC. That was it. That was the only thing we decided on. Right?
Hold on. Yeah, I guess that was right. Correct. I thought there was another one. Okay. Well, what did I say? Free speech online and having a platform.
Security, yeah.
So financial intel and security. So that covers everything, like from like FinCEN and know your customer kind of rules and all these banking regulations, but also like outside the U.S. because it's like worse everywhere else.
Right.
Potentially. I mean, it's literally worse everywhere else if you adjust for like the scale of what they can. I don't know. I mean, I think I was just seeing something today about Britain.
These things are all
not
kind of related too, you know.
Yeah. Not just. Yeah, I mean, I'm saying like interpret all this like broadly, like whatever tangents we want to go into. I know you don't want to do it too long, but I need to use the bathroom real quick so I can hopefully go straight through this thing, and then we'll start recording.
All right, that'll work.
Be right back. Oh, forgot to mute. What's going on?
What's up?
All right, let's go. Obviously, we're already recording, so I'll just cut that off the off the recorded file. Yeah, this is gonna be fun. I'm glad we're doing this.
Yeah, this will be good. We can go into a couple of things.
Yeah.
I think it's
All
going
right.
to be useful. So,
All right. 3, 2, 1. Hey, folks. Welcome back to the Agora Podcast. It's me, Penguin, here with Sec Agora, coming at you as always from our respective studios and wherever they are. Two undisclosed locations, not particularly close to each other. How you doing today, Sec?
doing all right. Got kind of a rainy weekend, and my daughter had her third birthday Friday. So we've
Nice.
been just hanging out, playing with toys over the weekend. So it's
Dang.
been
So
good.
this is birthday season in my family. We have a lot. Yeah, we have a lot of birthdays.
A lot of
Me and
Januaries.
my in early February, but like really
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
pretty close to each other. Yeah, so she's in between like me and my brothers. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was just saying earlier today that there's a um ton of January and early February birthdays. Even in our signal chat, there's like 5 or 6 January birthdays. So it's kind of odd actually, but
Nice.
yeah, it's been a lot. My birthday's in January too, so earlier this month. So it's
Well,
just been
my
like
mom's
birthdays.
is.
Really? Oh yeah.
Yeah, so like most of my family is like in a month span, basically.
Cool. Yeah, my
Yeah.
brother is in January too, so it's a lot of something about January. It's probably you know,
Well, subtract 9 months from that,
spring fever.
maybe.
Yeah, a little spring fever.
Yeah,
Yep. It's probably some of that.
something like that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so I think today's episode is going to be pretty cool. For one thing, I don't think we've done anything like this in a while. It's like a quote unquote normal episode where it's just you and me talking about stuff. Um, Not that because it's not really explicitly like an interview podcast. I mostly like to have guests on, but we've had some bangers, which is you and myself, especially when we kind of set the mood, kind of set up this podcast and what our agenda is and what we're all about. And I think it's really cool because we actually so we had kind of a change of plans and schedule. We had something else planned to record today, and we were able to like pivot and on short notice just come up with some topics completely unprompted and without any prep that we know we can talk about for a certain length of time, which I think is really cool, and it's obviously why we do a podcast together. Um, because I know people like that I've known from back in the day, let's say, before I've always had a lot of similar inclinations, I guess, but before I was more involved with these kind of things online, uh, politically, I guess you could say. I think we use the term politics to cover these kind of things. Um, and they couldn't discuss even one of these topics. They wouldn't even be able to recognize not one of these topics, which is cool. I've had my own interests. I've diverged into my own set of interests, but it's kind of cool that you and I could discuss basically all of them unprompted off the dome, just like that.
Well, I think we've got um not to toot our own horns, but we've got a wide variety of things that we're interested in. And we're generally fairly knowledgeable about a number of different topics. Um, so I think that it's less so of tooting our own horns and more that just we're sort of like what they call polymath or something like that. Like we are interested in a variety of things, and so we end up being knowledgeable about a variety of different topics. Um, whereas I think a lot of folks are sort of narrow focus on one or a couple of things. Um, but to me, that's kind of boring. So I like going into a variety of things. So, but what
Yeah,
do we?
and I was gonna
Go
say
ahead.
yeah, but like and really like my media consumption really does bring up these things quite a bit. So it's kind of things that, in many cases, I've been itching to talk about because a lot of times I'll listen to stuff. I listen to a lot of podcasts. That's why I do a podcast, and but I don't always have someone to talk about it with. I guess I could just be more. I could participate more in chats, which I don't. So I just kind of I stick to kind of posting on Twitter. I like the platform, but yeah, where I don't know where do you might want to begin our discussion today. I know we had just kind of discussed CBDCs, so kind of what I have CBDCs on the mind quite a bit is that I've started listening to like some back episodes from 2023 calendar year from like the Bob Murphy's podcast from the Mises Institute, which is like really economics heavy, but it's kind of cool to just listen to something a little sort of I can barely comprehend that I don't know about. I don't want to really have like the stuff I do know about reinforced or whatever. Um, and they've been talking a lot. They talk about a lot about the Fed and banking and CBDCs. And I think kind of the world of finance and economics is not something you have like no background or like knowledge of, but it's certainly on like a higher level. And they talk about CBDCs a lot, and I think it comes up a lot. And it's gotten a surprising amount of traction, but it's still a niche and kind of wonky topic on among like libertarian anarchists, and various people on the right. But it's a niche topic that's still outside of the main part of the mainstream, so to speak.
Well, funny thing about CBDC. Okay, first of all, that stands for central bank digital currency.
Thank you.
So a crypto that is going to be used by banks and governments. So funny thing about that was when I first came across cryptocurrency in like the early 2010s, um, I was like, no, that's going to be used to create a digital currency. That's exactly what that's going to be used for. And the reason I that didn't, I just didn't pull that out of my own head. That was something that had been sort of circulating around, we'll say, conspiracy circles for like decades and decades and decades before that. Since mid to late 90s, maybe even earlier. So the basically the theory always was that the powers that be, the banks and the governments, and that we're going to do away with the USD, and institute some sort of digital currency, and create like a cashless society. So that's been like the conspiracy. And 30 years ago, you would have been, and I was, you would have been called me, batshit crazy conspiracy kook or whatever the thing. But now it's just talked about as just like any other policy. Like it's, the pros and the cons, and yeah, this is probably coming, and here's what you got to know, and all that kind of stuff, just like any other policy. It's not a conspiracy theory anymore. It's just, it is what it is. So that was my concern with cryptocurrency when I first um, even heard about it. I mean, early 2010s. And slowly I sort of came around to the idea. But then guess what? Here we are, where cryptocurrencies have sort of been co opted into the government and legacy banking system. And now, or in some ways, are going to be used as tools of control and domination and whatever else. When I first understood how, like, because even it took me a while to understand how cryptocurrencies actually work. Even after I had already like heard about them, it took me a long time because I was not tech savvy. It took me a long time to really understand how all that kind of works. And I'm like, no, listen, like the banks would love an immutable ledger that won't ever go away, that everyone can see every transaction. Okay. So this was my concern with cryptocurrencies at the time. But, then I was sort of convinced otherwise, like, yeah, no, we'll be able to have security and these sorts of things, cryptography, and we'll be able to hide these transactions and so on and so forth. But the underlying backbone of cryptocurrency is being used for CBDCs, which is going to be like the most egregious techno dystopia if it ever comes around to being implemented. And we can sort of see the effects of like even just digital commerce not even CBDCs, but um, say whatever you want about what was the Canadian trucker thing. I don't even remember what that was about anymore. Vaccine passports, maybe.
A mandate, some sort of mandates. Yeah.
Mandates, some sort of mandate, vaccine mandates in Canada, right? So say whatever you want about the trucker rally or whatever, but they shut down all their money, like without a problem, and that's just sort of the problem with. I don't even know if it's digital commerce in general or digital commerce, at least in our current, paradigm with state and banking cartels running the
Well, they were
system.
debanked. They were debanked. I mean,
Right.
yeah, they
Well,
were debanked.
they froze all their assets in the banks, as far as I can understand.
Okay, so maybe they weren't. Well, yeah. So
Yeah,
technically, maybe they may not have been closed, but yeah, they were basically debanked or whatever. Or they were
sure.
temporarily frozen. I guess instead of maybe having your accounts closed, but then of course it becomes like all banks basically close your accounts, because I mean, obviously, one bank closing an account, you can go down the street to another bank, maybe with some degree of difficulty and cost. But yeah,
Yeah, now you got a
yeah,
red
that
flag.
that was really concerning. And of course, it's good. Like, it happened in Canada. Maybe it's not the environment. I mean, the situation wasn't the same, obviously, because there were no similar protests, really, legitimately, in the U.S. And but it's good to have that warning sign coming from someplace like Canada or someplace like the U.K. That's similar enough but different enough in that these things will probably happen there first before, when the environment over here is maybe not as friendly to it, but obviously always trending into the same sort of, you could say, authoritarian direction. Away from, I don't know if you want to say an Anglo tradition of like presumption of some level of liberty and privacy, but I do think we kind of have that, and you'll see, ironically, someplace like the UK where that comes from. I think it's fairly. I'm not saying it's unique in the whole world, but it's like a distinct thing that comes out of the UK, and they've completely lost it. I mean, they have all sorts of. They can put the police. I just saw a tweet today that the police can put a notice on your bank account in the UK, and you have suspected ties to, without any proof, suspected ties to having proceeds of like criminal activity, and the banks can close all of your accounts, and you'll be unable to bank. And I don't doubt that kind of infrastructure could and does exist in the U.S. Like, the infrastructure for it certainly exists in the U.S., and the ability to track suspected um suspected funds and transfers of funds and everything. I'm sure it actually exists, and they have the ability to like track these things and
It
do it
already
on the law
exists for
enforcement
sure.
side. Oh yeah, I'm sure they can do it, but the then the political will to actually just use that overtly, because
I don't know if they can.
what you can say,
Oh, go
that's
ahead.
different. What I'm saying is it's a separate thing. It's a different thing whether they can blatantly outright do that, except on the very, very, very margins. Obviously, if someone is a so it has some connection, like material connections with terrorism, people aren't going to question that, or maybe there will be some people questioning that as a watchdog to make sure they're telling the truth. But it's not something that's been implemented just on suspicion, or and when it has, maybe it's gone to the courts or something. But like, the ability to actually just straight up do that isn't always there. But you might see a country like Canada or UK where it's like people are totally cool with it, at least on a level that they aren't in the US.
Sure, it's not it's not quite the same as just being able to go in and shut your bank down on suspicion, but there's been a number of people engaged in various industries that the authorities had them come in and shut their banks down. Um, the banks will say, you're too much of a risk or whatever the thing. Like Cody Wilson with his 3D printing, when he was going through several lawsuits, the government put, pressure on his banks, or at least that's the story, that they put pressure on his banks. Various, sex workers and stuff have been sort of debanked. It's under the RICO laws, and I believe it's either the Patriot Act or the NDAA. I can't remember which now. But if you're suspected of any kind of like terrorist stuff, they're, at the very least, they don't want to shut your bank down, because that doesn't make sense. For the most part, they'd rather see where your money's going, right? So if you're some knucklehead here who's suspected of terrorism, they're gonna just monitor your bank. You know what I mean? So, and the banks will absolutely just work hand in hand with the government. To me, banks are just essentially a field office of the Treasury Department. That's the way I see banks. So, the here I think the the move is for most law enforcement, just to see where your money's going. So if they suspect you're building bombs or whatever, they want to see who you're sending money to so they can go get those people, right? And if they shut your bank down, they can't do that, right? So I think it's more useful most of the time. It's not that they don't have the political will or they wouldn't do that. I think it's more useful to them that if they suspect you of something, to actually keep your bank account open, because they're more easy. It's more easy for them to monitor what you're doing, your transactions, your activities. All the data they can get is helping them paint a picture of who you are, what you're doing, and what your network is. You see what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think we're kind of talking about two different things too. I mean, they're both under the same heading, but I think you can separate like the the law enforcement and the intelligence side from that, from actually wanting to just debank people, to disrupt their activities, to make their lives more difficult. For what they're doing, what they're saying. I mean, that's what always the fear is. I'm not saying that that's happening on a wide scale. I mean, it's like notably something that people care about before it starts happening on a wide scale. I mean, you don't even have a chance if it's not something people are ready to get. Certain people that kind of care about the issue start to get up in arms about before it starts happening. I think that you risk the idea of it like actually starting to occur and be implemented, and there's nothing you can really do about it. But like as far as actually like debanking people, excuse me, and a lot of people that were. So here's the thing: you've got, and this is also kind of a market thing, because we're talking about even private entities or private companies. I mean, we can argue about the nature of private companies, but services like delivery services and Uber and stuff like that, and Airbnb and such, have like targeted and closed accounts of far right activists that were considered supporting hateful and bigoted and racist speech and propagating that kind of material and everything. And I think it's very easy to kind of sell that, just like when you apply a label of terrorism, to apply a label of like racism and bigotry to certain people at the very extremes of that kind of world. And then all of a sudden you see bank accounts shut down, and then you see accounts, and it's a different kind of thing, but like accounts from private companies closing down their accounts. Now you can't get an Uber, but I've known people that aren't far right. Well, maybe, but I think they maybe have been painted with that brush. I want to say somebody who's been on the show a couple of times has not been able to use some of those companies. So yeah, as a matter of fact. But I think probably the label was painted far right insurrectionist sort of thing with because of the nature of their political activities. But I guess the concern there isn't that you were doing potentially illegal activities by some measure or not, but whether you're doing something that's there's obviously a huge overlap between the two, but something that's just disfavorable politically.
So I have two thoughts about it, right? So like on the one hand, like I sort of understand why companies just wouldn't want to be involved with any kind of controversy, right? So I understand that. But on the other hand, I also understand, and I think the sort of left market anarchists are the best on this. And we've talked about this before, but private company is essentially meaningless. Like most of these quote unquote private companies now are just doing the bidding of the state, right? So, like I said before, banks are just basically a field office of your treasury department. Most of the gun manufacturers and even your local gun store is essentially a field office for the ATF. Most of your uh, um, like military industrial complex sort of companies, there is no delineation between them and like the State Department and the Pentagon. You know what I mean? Like even the Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics, they've acted as cutouts for the CIA like numerous times. Okay, they were running the CIA was running operations like out of Lockheed Martin facilities in Vietnam and into Cambodia. Do you know what I mean? So it's like there is these people. They don't even need the government to tell them to enforce these sorts of standards, I guess we'll say, or various narratives or control mechanism. They'll do it on their own because it's in their best interest too. So the state, it's this, the government and these corporations against you. It's these corporations that have, very little to do with, um, your best interests or making you a product. They serve the system as a whole. So a distinction between private and public is essentially meaningless. We have this very blurred delineation between these two entities, and I think they're essentially all one big organization in some sense. They all work for each other, or they all work for the same boss. So, and it's the very like sort of simplistic definition of fascism is the merger of state and corporate power, right? Now, that's not really a good description of fascism. That's like one way to look at fascism, but you really got to like really delve into fascism. It's a whole political economy and stuff, and there's way more to fascism than just that. But that's where we are. There is no delineation between government and corporate power. So, you know, on the one hand, there is some light at the end of the tunnel, and a lot of like even, I guess we'll say right libertarians are like coming around to this, where in years past they would be like, oh well, it's a private company, bro. They can, you know, put whatever boot they want on your neck. You just have to go somewhere else. When essentially it's this large prison has been created, that we call the system, and it's been created by the government and these corporations. They're just as complicit. So, the answer is to remove yourself from this as much as you possibly can. And in certain aspects of my life, I have to use a bank, but don't rely on your bank. Keep other methods of storing wealth and transactions. Have other options. Have a network in place that you can trust to get goods and services and that sort of thing, and produce for yourself. And just sort of, if you can't remove yourself entirely from this, try to insulate yourself from this as much as possible, because I don't see this aspect of our society getting better.
Yeah, and I remember when this sort of shift began to happen, and I have a few thoughts about that. So I think it's great that coming from the left market anarchist, which doesn't even need to be a thing. I mean, that was a point in time, and it's all stuff that's real, and ideas that were compiled from those that came before, and those will all live on. Great thing, but like people pointed out, it was a certain. Market's not capitalism is really what I'm thinking of. Came out of a certain time where it just coalesced and kind of needed to be occurred, and it affected so many people. But yeah, like those ideas became more popular on the libertarian right when sort of culture war battles and then ongoing with the pandemic and everything started heating up. And I agree with the right I sympathize with the right libertarians more than ever, but like at the same time, let's not say like private companies do exist. And I'm not saying that private right-wing libertarians see as like a viable option. That some people have suggested like nationalizing in some way social media companies to prevent them from doing so and so or anything. I think that's different than the right libertarian sort of ideas or solutions to these things. But at the same, this is in regards to social media companies. And I do think there is still a distinction between private companies and the government. I mean, there's literal distinctions. I think the question arose, obviously, like, yeah, if you sort of have those kind of left tendencies, those anarchist tendencies, you sort of understand there's this thing as the system, there's this thing as the man, and that thing is not necessarily restricted to just, you know, what's nominally the government, you know, what's officially or what's technically or nominally the government. um and yes, it's kind of wild to see the right libertarian right, the right in general, the dissident right, the far right, everything, the post liberal right, kind of come around to that, but come around to that, as people often do, really heavy, like really as really strong believers of that, and then saying, well, we need a, you know, maybe we need a muscular government, you know, led by Rob DeSantis or whatever, to kind of rein in these woke, you know, liberal capitalists or whatever. um, which I don't think that, but as far as the right wing libertarians, like, yeah, there still is. I mean, there's some. Let's push back from the full embrace of that, because like there is some difference between private companies and private and the government itself, and ultimately, like, what do we got to be careful what we're going to say. Like, do you want, because we said we were going to talk about free speech as a part of this too, but do we want to say that a social media platform doesn't have the ability to moderate its own content? And obviously, you mentioned obviously that they would, and you really can't make the argument that they can't moderate their own content. And what kind of legal regime would exist where, like, you ban social media companies, or maybe social media companies of a certain size or whatever, from moderating their own content? Like, that's a stronger intervention. And obviously, like this, they're not going to stay in business if they have no ability to moderate other content. Of course, nobody's saying they should be carrying extremely objectionable content or illegal content. um so now you're drawing a line and saying, oh, now you can't moderate and curate your platform, or whatever. And that seems, I mean, just to say that there is now no private public distinction whatsoever, is kind of, it's a third situation. The situation is the situation that arose, for example, with Twitter and Facebook and these large tech companies, is specifically that they are private organizations. I mean, there is the thing about whether these companies could exist without the Federal Reserve System and the banking system, whatnot. But these companies are private organizations. But what happens when institutions are captured up to the point where, I mean, it's remarkable how much of this stuff that we used to talk about from the LWMA standpoint just has been totally, you know, taken on as orthodoxy by people all throughout, like, the intellectual right. But, like, yeah, I mean, I've been listening to this for a long time, and it's like, it's amazing how much the institutions have been captured to the point where, I mean, we've discussed this with the Noam Chomsky idea, but like, everybody in the organization, everybody that gets hired by this organization, and they're hiring managers, and they're ones in charge of hiring others. But everybody that staffs these organizations almost invariably are going to have the same politics and the same beliefs and the same views, whether you consider them pro-establishment, or you consider them, you know, left progressive, or whatever the situation may be. And whereas Noam Chomsky might have been viewing, as sort of a left-leaning anarchist, might have been viewing the pro-establishment people as being very conservative. And of course, they are very small-c conservative from, like, his standpoint, wherever they stand as journalists. Famous clip where he was talking to the New York Times journalist and asking whether they, you know, get, or was one of those papers, whether they get marching orders directly from the government. And it's like, you don't have to, you know, just in case people don't know about the clip. But yeah, when you have these companies, these private companies, and they have so much sway, and they're not necessarily monopolies, but they have so much sway over society. A lot of it just sort of the nature of the business, and it's not necessarily a plot or conspiracy or anything. But then you have a situation where all of these universities graduating, you know, qualified candidates for these jobs are graduating people with very similar politics and very similar views and fundamental views about how society works or should work. The downstream effects can be, like, very dangerous. But basically what I'm saying is, it doesn't require that direct government intervention, especially in something like speech, where literally the First Amendment is so strong in the US incredible culture of free speech in this country. But you don't need to circumvent government restriction on speech when people basically in charge of platforming speech are of the same viewpoint. And so it's just a workaround. And I think a lot of stuff with liberal democracy is just, oh, you work around those checks and balances, you know?
Well, I'll say this about free speech. Like, so, so as long as like a government exists, yeah, I think we should be able to say what we think, within a very wide spectrum of reason. However, it just if you really think about it, free speech is something that only exists like within liberal democratics. It's it's how you manage commons under, excuse me, under government ownership of property.
100% agreed. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's not something that would exist in a free society, right? Like you
Not at
don't
all. Yeah, yeah. It's totally contingent on like how things are
having
set
government
up now.
property, right? It presupposes government property. It's like what you're able to say in the common or the town square or on government property or whatever. Like if we're in a free society, like you don't have the right to come in my house and start, shouting racial slurs at my kids or whatever. I can tell you to get the fuck out of my house, right? So even if you had like small scale like community managed commons, you'd still have like various like standards of behavior, like basic things that you really aren't allowed to do like in fucking public or whatever, like no, like if you had the even in an anarchist society and you had a small community park or something along those lines, nobody's going to want you like screaming belligerent at their kids or while they're trying to go play with their kids at the park or whatever the thing, right? So there's free speech in the first place is something that only really exists when you have government property. It's a liberal democratic idea. It's not something that's actually like has anything to do with freedom or anarchism like at all. um you have the right to do whatever you want, but your rights stop at somebody else's rights. Do you know what I mean? So like I said, you don't have
I
the
would
right.
agree with you.
Right.
Look, I just want to interrupt because I want you to go on with that train of thought. But I want to say, like, I would agree with you. A lot of people wouldn't. I would agree with you. A lot of people are going to say that certain liberal values are, you know, are, are or will be or should be the norm under sort of a libertarian anarchist um, system. And
Sure.
I don't agree with that. I much more agree with the idea for the most part. I mean, I understand the idea of free speech maybe as a sort of ethereal idea. Yeah, maybe it's a good idea in some cases, but no, I'm very much of the idea that property rights is supreme for the specific reason that, like an idea like free speech, like you said, is sort of contingent on, it's a check on government. It's basically a check on state power.
Right. It's how the government manages government property. That's it. But that's how the government is supposed to manage government property. You're supposed to allow them people to say whatever they want on government property for the most part. Now, I sort of agree that like even in an anarchist society that things would lean more towards like a freedom of speech and behavior within reason. And some, let's take the community park. Let's say every fucking community has a community park, just for the sake of what I'm trying to explain is like some community parks will be more restrictive on what you're allowed to say and and how you're to behave in public than others. Some will be more, let's say, liberal in the sense that like open or free about what you're allowed to do, and some will be less so. And it just kind of depends. But there is no like absolute you have freedom of speech at all. It's not something that exists outside of this specific paradigm. So uh, I do think that most people generally value that ideal, so I think it would sort of transcend into um, sort of an anarchist societies. But again, it's um, there won't be government property, so it's going to be like almost a moot point. You know what I mean? But I will say on the other hand, like, okay, so that ideal is the product of government and liberal democracy, or at least its enforcement and encoded into law. I mean, it's something that's sort of goes back to the Magna Carta, but in English common law. But either way, that exists due to and it is encoded into law due to liberal democracy and government. But guess what else is? Corporations and the these mega tech companies and uh giant corporations that have so much effect over all of us. These are a product of the government also. So that's just because like I don't accept like free speech outside of like restrictions on government. It doesn't mean I'm okay with these fucking companies doing whatever they want either. I'm not a giant fan, and I think they are also products of the state. So I don't have an answer, but I don't think either way is correct. Like I don't think these quote unquote private companies are correct, and I don't think the government is either. And again, this is all of this problem is because of the system as a whole. Like this situation is created by the system of government and corporations. So
Yeah.
the answer is to fucking walk away. It's the more I I say this all the time, and I've been saying it for years, and to me it just becomes more and more obvious every day. It's just walk away from all this. It's we have to create something new. Like there is no fixing this at all, and we have to build something else.
Yeah, and this reminds me of some of the conversations we've had based on certain libertarian anarchists sort of critiquing certain other communities and ideas of libertarian and or anarchist community setups, or like certain ideologies, and I'll explain which ones I'm talking about. But basically, something like the well, for one thing, if somebody like the Democratic Confederate, what are they called? The Kurdish Democratic Confederalists, the Rojava and all them, or the Zapatistas or somebody, or whoever else comes up with something that's quote unquote almost anarchist. I think they deserve a tremendous amount of credit from anarchists specifically for doing that. I mean, it's just absolutely unique in this world what they're able to do at the scale that they do. Obviously, I'm sure this happens on anarchism happens all the time, constantly at very small scales. But I'm talking about it, sort of the scales that they're doing it at. But the idea is that, for example, I know recently the Zapatistas were criticized because they do not allow a quote. Well, it's been a paraphrase, but they actually said they don't allow drug use in most of their communities, and people were kind of lambasting them and saying, "Oh, that's just Hopi and Covenant communities," and even people that I like talk with a lot saying like that's like the Hopi and Covenant communities. They don't want gay people or whatever. But you know what? Honestly,
The horseshoe
think
theory is
that
real, though. I'll
well,
tell you that.
but dude, but again, when it comes down to liberalism, I think that's perfectly fine. Now, you might want to get to question like the idea of collective property, but I mean, left-wing market anarchists have an idea of collective property that doesn't conflict with private property. I mean, there are places where there are different rules, and these liberal ideas of like liberal neutrality, which aren't obviously respected when one group gets enough power, you know. In charge. I mean, let's talk about liberal neutrality, and as far as like how the government commons is supposed to be governed according to basically the idea of ideological and religious neutrality. That was developed because of the first the development of Protestantism and the different churches of Protestantism versus the Catholics in England, and how so they can get along, which is a great example of like why that was needed and exactly how that worked. And it's but it's, it's one of those situations where, yeah, you let one side get enough power and they might take it and be less apt to have to instill that liberal neutrality than your side has been. So I don't know. I think that communities can, basically through free association and whatnot, kind of restrict things and not be totally open in the way that maybe a liberal society has this desire for a certain amount of openness because of the presence of the commons.
So I do have a lot of respect for Rahava and their sort of Bookchanite democratic federalism or municipalism. And I do have a lot of respect for the Zapatistas. And in some sense, they're not creating these societies in a vacuum, right? Um, so I think they have to be slightly more centralized than they necessarily would be in a free world, right? Um, and I sort of understand they're trying to keep like cartel influence out of their community, specifically the Zapatistas are trying to keep cartel influence out of their communities. And I understand that. But any situation where like a council has the ability to tell me what I can put in my body, I don't want a part of. Now, there's other ways of like sort of achieving that through like disassociation and ostracization rather than actually having like a community council that has the ability to decide and enforce things like that. And essentially you can just not associate with people that you don't want to associate with, or at least not while they're doing behaviors that you don't like. Like I don't okay, so I don't want to be somebody around somebody that's fucking shooting heroin all the time or doing a bunch of meth. Like I don't want to do that either. But I don't want to like vote with my federal, fellow neighborhood on whether they can or cannot do that. And then how do you enforce that? Do you have, your anarcho jails or whatever the fuck, So I think disassociation and sort of ostracization is the only real way to like solve that and still call yourself free. I don't like the idea of covenant communities, although I'm not opposed to like other people doing that if they want to. To me, that's some sort of weird, like boring conservative, like live action role play club. But that's not that's not just smells like HOA lawn Nazi shit to me that I don't like that. I don't like anyone, including my neighbors, having that much control over what I do with my life. You know what I mean?
I totally get it. I totally get it. But here's my view of that is I think that's a dimension of like a free association. I think that preference. I mean, we can argue whether it's you're being more ideological pure to something that's anarchistic, right? Non coercive and everything. I think to some degree that's correct, but I think that's almost a type of preference that you can use when kind of building or choosing or moving to or what amalgamating or seceding from a community. You know what I mean? I think I think there are people that want to live in a community that have this a viewpoint very similar to you, but I think there is an ability to create a community through something as close to free association is feasible.
Okay, sure.
Um, that people can choose, to give up some level of freedom. Just like if you're going to live in the more dense of a community, you're going to do. If you're going to live in close proximity, if you're going to live in a tightly packed city, or maybe even a little bit less dense city, there's some level of individual freedom, even if you have like freedom of your lifestyle. There's some level of autonomy that you have to give up to gain some kind of to gain whatever advantages you get from living in that city and living in that sort of level of population density, which I think a lot of free thinking people don't like that level of population density for that reason, even now, and not to mention in the future where there's a good amount of choice between sort of how they would live. So I think, yeah, I think you can as close to voluntarily as possible give up, any amount of any certain amount of freedom for other benefits. I guess with maybe a guarantee of a right to secession or something. That's my
Here's
only concern, probably
here's
where the
I
concern arises for that.
here's I think where the difference kind of is. So like take the Amish. The Amish essentially have a Hoppian covenant community, right? I don't have any problem with the Amish. Good for you. If that makes what makes you happy, go for it. And if that's how you want to live, like I fucking get it. If like if you removed a couple of things, I'd be joining with them. You know what I mean? So like I understand it. Not that Hoppians are against tech or whatever, but it's a very similar kind of ideal. They want like very sort of simple, non-cosmopolitan, sort of conservative and modest things, right? And so I get it. Here's the thing: everyone before that is there has decided to go there to live under a very specific set of standards. The standards are very clear before they have decided to live there. Like even if you're born there, you're still allowed to leave, and then you decide if you want to come back for the Amish. Whereas something like the Zapatistas, I already lived here. I'm here because I believe in what Zapata stood for and the resistance to the Mexican government and all these sorts of things. And then I'm here living, and I want to live in this sort of like municipalist way. And then all of a sudden they're deciding about what I can and can't put in my fucking body or whatever. And that's not what I signed up for. So they've changed the standards after I was already here. So now do they have the right to tell me, do my neighbors now have the right to tell me that I can leave, that I have to leave because I listen to heavy metal or, whatever the devil's music or because I fucking, I don't even do drugs, so I don't even know. Like, or let's say I smoke pot because I smoke a little bit of pot. Like, this isn't what I came here for. I came here for this other reason because of XYZ. And then the neighbors have the ability and the right to change the standards and what they actually control through vote. That doesn't seem fucking right to me either. Like as much as like Hoppians are against democracy, how did they think their fucking covenant community is going to make decisions? You're going to have this council of fucking property owners voting on what you can and can't do in your fucking yard and what tomatoes can you grow. And I'm sorry, that flamingo is it's an HOA lawn Nazi from fucking hell, except they can control what you actually do inside your house also. And that's just sounds fucking terrible to me. Now, if like I said, if there I see the appeal of fucking the Amish more and more every day. But again, like the standards for the Amish have never changed. They don't take a vote and decide what people can and can't do. It's always just fucking been that way. And if you have the decision to go live under these standards, but those standards are going to change once you're there. And then, the standards are going to change in 5 years. And now you have to pick up and move, or they're going to try to kick you out of your neighborhood. Like, I can't get behind that. Now, if somebody wants to go live that way, fucking fine. But I don't think most people will. And I certainly don't. And it sounds fucking terrible. I don't think it's going to even really work. And I think just like, you ever had a neighbor that was just a shithead, like you just couldn't get along and they were just a pain in the ass? You just don't fucking talk to them. You know what I mean? Like, go fucking do your own thing. They don't have the benefits of being friends with you now. That's the fucking enforcement. And then they start to get, fucking a reputation in the neighborhood or whatever the thing. And now nobody's going to come help them when their truck's fucking stuck in the snow. Do you know what I'm saying? So like, these things have a way of sorting themselves out without some sort of formal council or like, fucking a council of property owners who all come together to vote about what color you're going to paint your fucking house or whatever the thing. Or like, oh, I'm sorry, your dress was a little bit too fucking high up, so we're going to have to ask you to like move. Fuck off. Like these there's ways to solve these things without like top-down enforcement, even democratically. And yes, I include democratic enforcement as top-down because you're essentially making a vote, and then the winners are now somehow have to enforce that on the communities, and I can't get
Yeah,
behind that.
and I think there's a lot of ways that this could be done, or a lot of things ways that this is done in human society, from like true democracy, like direct democracy, or like some kind of imperfect democracy. And I'm not just saying imperfect in the sense that it's like a democratic representational republic, but like that you could describe American democracy as the results don't even necessarily align with public opinion from for the most part, and that's for various reasons. I mean, I don't have the trust in democracy where I say I would rather there be a direct democracy. What I'm saying is that there's certainly like imperfections where we don't receive true democracy, and then true democracy itself would probably be theoretically have a lot of theoretical flaws, like you're pointing out. And then, well, I don't think Hoppians are constitutionalists, but they know that having a constitution of some sort is sort of a check on that like idea of just having a democratic vote for everything. And of course, that has its own pros and cons. I mean, a lot of things have pros and cons, but I do see your point about sort of societal management like that. And like I said, I think that people with free association and sort of non-coercive government, where they can have uh, the ability to choose these things, maybe they would. I don't know what people would choose, but you're very clear about what you would find preferable. I don't have a lot of intolerance for various different ideas that people could potentially come up with. I think that I mean, when we get to the point where we are disbanding, mega states and stopping, global war and so forth, then yeah, we can have these discussions. But I think my priority is mostly on, if we were to get rid of like the global warfare and the kind of large scale um, administrative states and militarized administrative states that kind of dominate the world and kind of have this de facto kind of established hegemony. Even though people call it anarchy, it's also a sort of hegemony of certain kind of ideals by which they recognize each other's power. I'd put that priority first, and if the result was that there are a wide variety of different type of communities of less coercive nature and less of an ability to project kind of military force, that's kind of some of my primary concerns. I think that would be fine. But I do see your point. Like, yeah, obviously, maybe this is an American thing too. Maybe this is an anarchist thing, or maybe a little bit of both. I mean, I think I see your point that people, don't necessarily of a freedom or a liberty loving orientation, don't necessarily want to be at the whims of whoever is running things for the day or for a period of time's interpretation of a constitution or a democratic vote.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't, and I don't think a lot of people would either. And you're right, some people will trade certain freedoms for certain comforts and certain securities, but and I guess we all do that, right? We all do that to some degree, like even in our own lives. But I don't see so I don't. I mean, I am partial to like the Carl Hesch sort of community technology, like it's very democratic confederalist sort of thing. So I am kind of partial like to community, like neighborhood governance. I'm okay with that. It's just a matter of what do they really have um control over. So like I don't like I wouldn't like I would like community govern, like let's say our you and me and a couple other people lived in a neighborhood and we set together like a committee to handle things that affected all of us. That's what I would like it to stick to. Like, well, what are we going to do about the fucking plowing the snow in the winter? Or, you know, who's going to maintain that common area over there? Let's, pull some money in and blah, blah, blah. Very, nuts and bolts kind of stuff. I'm okay with that. Like, I don't have a problem with even handling that democratically. But once you start deciding about what I can do on my own time, uh, that's where I sort of draw the line. And I think for most people that would be an affront. I think most people would be amenable to like something like the Zapata or the government covenant community or even an HOA if they just stuck to like paving the roads and mulching the flower beds and whatever the thing that something that all affected all of us that live on this road and very very maintenance kind of stuff, right? I'm okay with that. I just keep it to that. And behavior modification can be handled sort of socially without any kind of formal governance mechanism. Once you start going down that road, it gets slippery fucking fast, and I don't see it going well, and I don't think most people will go for it anyway. So that's kind of where I stand on that. But
Yeah. I mean, I do have. I mean, I know people that differ from this, but I don't have much of a problem with the ideas of local government. I don't have much problem with local government now. Like, I don't really care when I see the local government like fixing streetlights, or even posting a speed limit sign. Honestly, and I think I draw this thing. I mean, we're talking two different discussions, hypotheticals and reality, but
right.
I don't have a problem with a level of government that doesn't have a military. I mean, that's one major thing. And obviously, there's a big caveat here, and that's obviously that there can be a quite a bit of level of like cronyism and corruption at actual local government levels on politically. But I don't mind the idea of a local government that has certain municipal responsibilities, and then we can quibble on what some of those are and how they're carried out. But as far as really, I tend to put that at a much lower priority at or at the very bottom of the level a list of priorities in general, and largely it's because they don't have a military and the ensuing taxation and obviously military action
Well, here's the thing,
inside and
because
outside the borders that ensues from that.
this is kind of counterintuitive, but so the federal government is obviously the most egregious because they have the ability to like inflict pain, death, and suffering upon the world, and that's like the worst. It sure is the worst shit. But in terms of the stuff that actually affects your day to day life, it's the local tyranny that is going to be the worst because they're the ones that set sales tax. They're the ones that raise property taxes. They're the ones that set up uh, code enforcement and permits, and they're the ones that say what you can and can't do on your property. And they're the ones that says you can't collect rainwater. It's not the federal government. It's not even the state government. It's your local municipalities that have the most effect over your day to day life and your property. It's not the federal government. So it, I'm not people often in our circles are like against federal government or like but they're like, oh yeah, state rights and oh local government's good and this and that. And yes, I like municipal services. I think we can have another way of doing that without like a local government, but um I do like those things, but most of the sort of control over your day-to-day life comes from local governments, and they don't have a military, no, but they do have cops that will come fucking SWAT team your fucking house because you didn't cut your grass. Um, so I mean, I don't agree with you here in the sense that I agree with half of your point. I do like the municipal services. I don't like the rest of it, and I think most of the, like I said, most of the stuff that affects you directly, um, in your like material well-being is local stuff. Is local
Yeah,
government.
I mean,
Go ahead.
yeah. So, uh, uh, just to respond to that, like, yeah, I think maybe there are some essential, like, fundamental things wrong with like the federal level of government, or basically a state government. And that would really include any kind of sovereign state versus a local government. Obviously, especially when you get, yeah, I think there are things that are wrong with local governments that could evolve that are not necessarily as essential as they are to like the running of a state. But yeah, obviously I get your point. Um, but I would say actually, and this is kind of a U.S. specific. I mean, probably a lot of our discussions U.S. specific, but a U.S. specific thing is the state government is actually probably is I think constitutionally supposed to be and is kind of the one that affects you the most, because they set most of the laws and most of the they back most of the coercive force for sure. And they're meant to, and they're actually they're meant to have almost the entire footprint. Besides, I guess some of the, I mean, really local government. I don't know. Really, I think the state government is supposed to have most of the footprint for most of the people, um, and they generally do, and that's why that when it comes down to, like as you mentioned, state rights versus the federal government, it's it's I value that a lot less than maybe some people have in the past for a long time. And some of those people may have called themselves libertarian, and maybe they might be in some sense, but like, I don't know if it's really a libertarian thing. I do think that as a long term strategy, supporting decentralization in all or almost all cases is very important. I think that it just as a mechanical thing, decentralization and power devolution, or whatever you want to call these things, needs to happen as much as power as possible, and that includes secession and stuff like that. I think that's just something that absolutely needs to occur. When it comes to something like, we said we were going to bring up the whole Civil War topic or thing that's going on.
Yeah.
When it comes to something like Texas, the state of Texas, quibbling with the federal government over border enforcement, you know, it might be one of those situations where, in my opinion, I say just don't talk, be neutral, don't talk about it. It's not, you don't actually, nobody's actually asking for your opinion. So first of all, good thing to do in many cases where you don't have an actual strong opinion on something, because nobody's really asking you. But secondly, I don't really have like a strong side on this, but I do generally respect the idea of like more decentralization, and I think it's totally normal that states and federal government should quibble over who has the power to do stuff. Do I want to celebrate the government of the state specifically? No. I mean, there's to some extent sovereign states. It'd be nicer if there were 50 more sovereign states than there was one uh, government that sort of treats the sovereign states more and more like administrative divisions, because I think that does their long term effects are like deleterious to freedom, and to like just the ability to have diverse ideas, just to have ideas outside of a very narrow box, to sort of decided within one territory, and at the mouth of the Potomac River. I think there are certain major issues, and of course, I mean, where's the Pentagon? There's no 50 Pentagons distributed all over the continent. There is one in Arlington, right? So it's like it's kind of a big deal that it would be nicer to have sort of more sovereign states, I guess, but not because I celebrate sovereign states. I think it's less of a big deal ideologically than some people make it out to be.
So let me. This is something I've sort of wrestled with for like years and years, and I'm for devolution of power and political decentralization for sure. And not only do I think that like that's a good way forward, I think that's also a decent way for humans to live. Here's the thing: is like I don't think bringing tyranny closer to you is political decentralization, nor is it devolution of power. So, like, just because now I'm under the boot of the Tennessee government instead of the federal government, this is not have been a devolution of power. Now, in fact, most of the time, if states were given all the power, they would actually be far more egregious to me, just by proximity and an ability to enforce, right? So, like now the Tennessee and we've talked about this before. Now your oppressor lives fucking in your like 30 miles from you. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so it's very much easier. It's much easier for them to marshal forces to come enforce whatever they want. And history has shown over and over again that, and I'm not making an argument for the federal government here at all. I'm just saying that like the state government is not better, you know. So like just because we've like let's say we got rid of the federal government tomorrow and all we had were state governments, it in many cases I think it would be worse. Um Now you can always say, well, you can move. Yeah, but that's not fucking feasible to just pick up and move your life for like most people. So I think like a true and there's a lot of reasons why it would be worse. Mainly just logistics, and you have a government body dealing with a much smaller population than the 300 something million 300 something million people that the federal government does. They just simply can't enforce everything everywhere all the time. It's not possible. But it's much easier for state government to enforce a lot of egregious things over a smaller government, and their cops at that point they might as well be militaries. Their cops would be more than capable of dealing with those things, especially if you got rid of the federal government and then all of the states were responsible for their own security. They would just have a bunch of mini little fiefdoms. So I think
Oh, well, I
what
mean, they have militaries. I mean, it's just the National Guard and the Air
yes,
National Guard and all that stuff is actually pretty well distributed. I mean, you just literally
yeah,
change the amount of that. I mean, yeah, no, I get that, and that's why I say states aren't states. The American states, they really are a midpoint. Yeah,
yeah,
they're absolutely a midpoint, and they're not equivalent of what I would say to a local government. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, exactly. So I think a true devolution of power would be and a true political decentralization would be to create like you'd literally have to create it new from the bottom up. So a local you could create like a high like something that Carl Hess uh, talked about in either neighborhood power or community technology. Bookchin has talked about this a number of times. Kevin Carson even, but you would have like you'd build it from the bottom up with your your neighbors in your local community and create your own governance structure, however you wanted to set that up, and just committees or whatever thing, and to handle basic municipal concerns, and then we would sort of network out from there. And if everybody that would be true political decentralization and devolution of power, because the powers is down to the smallest point it could possibly be, and then we would just get supplant the top down power structures of states, local state governments and federal governments. Now in terms of like the current shit, like I did not have like we're going to be in Civil War II and World War III at the same time. Like I never saw that one coming. Um, and I honestly I make a joke, but I don't really think we'll be in a civil war. Um, but you never know. It didn't take much for the last civil war to kick off.
Yeah,
It took a
yeah,
few shots being fired back and forth, and a civil war kicked off. I think World War III is much more likely at this point, actually. Um, the thing in Israel Palestine could really kick off a regional war, and we're already fighting. The U.S. is already fighting several other wars, and a proxy war with China and Russia at the same time. And so, like, this could really boil into something much bigger. So I'm much more concerned about World War than I am Civil War. And part of me, my knee jerk reaction when I see Texas telling the feds to go fuck off, I'm like, well, good. I'm glad they're fighting. My exact quote on Twitter was like, I hope Joe Biden and Greg Abbott both shit their pants in public. They don't fuck them both, But I do like to see them fighting, because if they're fighting, uh, it's less time that they're terrorizing their own peoples, So I like to see my enemies fight. That's fine by me. But there is the concern of like uh and I like people telling the feds to go fuck themselves too. That's also pleasing to me. But there is a real concern of like this sort of it doesn't take much for the US has been a country for what 200 something years, right? And then we've already had one civil war. Most of over other countries have had multiple civil wars. Do you know what I'm saying? Like how many times have
Yeah, and
France had a civil, or Spain, or whatever, or any of the Balkans, or it's civil war after civil war after civil war, and we seem to. What's that? Is it comfort bias, where we seem to think that because this is the way it is, it sort of will always be this way, and we've had a relatively stable government this whole time, but that's not set in stone either. And I hate to see it happen. I saw a meme the other day. It's like when the Civil War starts breaking out and you fucking hate both sides, and it's just that dude with his hand on his hips. That's kind of how I feel about this, because I don't really have a I
yeah,
have
that's how
no
that went.
love.
We
I have no love
surely
for Greg
follow the same people.
Abbott or closed borders, and I have no love for Joe Biden, who's also a closed borders advocate. So I don't know what the fuck the fight even is about. It's just a sort of dick
Yeah,
measuring contest, basically. But
and that's why I have opinions. That's why I have opinions, because I don't think with borders that people are often. I mean, some of the border restrictions on the right are at least like honest about what they believe. Um, the populist right that wants to close the border, I think they're honest about what they believe. But everybody else is straight up lying through their teeth about what they want, what they believe, and what they want. I'd like to respond to a couple the previous thing, and then what you just brought about the Civil War. Just let's take a quick intermission. I'll be right back. I'll be back in like 2 minutes. Or do you want to take a longer intermission? Because I know we want to wrap it up soon, but
yeah, no, we can take a quick break. That'll be work.
all right.
That's it.
All right, I'm back.
All right, I'm back. You there?
Yeah. Am I muted?
No,
No,
you're
I'm
there.
here. Okay, good. All right.
All right, we should
Okay, let's just jump
wrap
back
this
into it.
up.
Yeah. So first, I want to respond to kind of like the decentralization devolution thing. I do think that decentralization and devolution of power stuff should be like it really should be pursued or encouraged at all costs. Just as a, and this is in the here and now. I'm not saying how I would plan a hypothetical society, which would of course be like by its very nature decentralized. But yeah, I mean more decentralization of power in the various ways that occurs, including like actual governmental power and borders. I mean, I think that should be encouraged at all times. So there's more. I don't know. There's. I mean, yes, local control can be important. Obviously, it's so far from a panacea, as we often discuss. But it's also allows for more heterogeneity and more and less ability to. I mean, I do think that militarism and military conflict is something that is the really the purview of like of large states, of large empires, of large states. Empire is kind of a technical term. It doesn't really need to be an empire, but of large states that have a large ability to coercively tax. That is what taxation I think was originally implemented for the most part. um, Not to go into the anthropological, but I think that militarism is the purview of large states, and I think a bunch of small states, could be militaristic, but through a series of alliances. But I think more likely you get confederalism, and so you get the benefits of free trade and lack of interior border controls and restrictions, and general freedom, um, without the large scale militarism, hopefully. But regardless of what the result is, what I think is that the more decentralization there is, regardless of if the policies implemented are progressive liberal, or even coercive liberal, or conservative, or traditionalist, or Islamic, or pro-Russian, or whatever, or the Shinto extremist or something, and you can decry sort of what happens in those places. But I think just as the course, the turn of history, I think decentralization is an overall better thing in the sense that you have very little control over world events as an individual in the first place. I think decentralization is better over more centralization in general, and that means also decentralizing technologies and decentralizing uh, ideas, essentially human technologies. I think that more institutions and less monopolistic institutions running things, both governmental and cultural and non-governmental organizations and everything. I do think I want more little players, more smaller borders, and more diversity of thoughts and opinions of what's possible. And I think that overall kind of lowers the ability of like states to massively coerce and engage in warfare, which is like the first order of things we should go off. And then everything else comes down from that, as far as my list of priorities, at least. But yeah, you don't have to agree with who this goes back to the pants session discussion with
Yeah, we had a
Adrian.
very
Is that
similar conversation with Adrian about this.
that's basically what I'm trying to get at, and that really changed my opinions. I didn't go into that discussion even know what we're talking about, but that really changed my opinion over time. I've seen the logic of his point of view, that basically, the secession and what I would call decentralization, where we're basically talking about the mechanism that can be achieved, is good in its own right. And I definitely agree with that wholeheartedly.
See,
And like I
I
said,
think of
local
it as
control
sort
is
of
not.
the inverse, though. I think that I don't think political decentralization is like the method. I think societal and like sort of technological decentralization is the method to achieve political decentralization. So I don't think we can
Okay.
achieve like freedom through like things like secession or states' rights or something like that by just creating another political body. But I think we can through things that exist outside, direct action, things that exist outside of sort of politics, I think we can create things that actually achieve political decentralization. So I kind of just think about it in reverse order in some sense. Like political decentralization is sort of the goal, but I don't think it's the method.
Yeah.
I don't
Now
I don't
I
think
also
it.
think of politics.
Go ahead.
I also think of politics almost like markets. I want more actors, not less acting. Which it's just I want more actors and less monopolistic actors acting within a marketplace, and that amount of heterogeneity. It just doesn't create the ideal society, but it creates different conditions than you get with, maybe an oligopolist, on the supply side of that.
Sure. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree. Um, I'm in Tennessee. It's generally suitable for me. Um, like in terms of the politics here, there's a lot I have problems with about Tennessee politics, but more, mostly the taxes are low, property's cheap, and their gun laws are fine. Now they'll throw me in jail if they catch me with fucking cannabis or psilocybin. They're going to throw me in jail, but um, for the most part, my local area has, more concern with throwing people in jail for meth or fucking bar fights and stuff like that. They're not really. I don't see them bust people for weed very often. But more, what I'm saying is more or less, I don't. There's a lot I have a problem with, like what my local and state government does, but for the most part, it's fine. You know, so I do kind of like understand what you're saying, that like more choices are, yes, they're better than less choices. Absolutely, but it doesn't necessarily mean my goal is like to just have more states. you know, like even as like a midway point, like I'm not going to ever strive for that. I'm not going to join like the 10th Amendment Center or whatever the thing, or some sort of states' rights organization. That's not gonna just not gonna be the thing. Like, okay, so let me give you a point of what I guess I'm trying to make. Like Ernie Hancock used to make this point. He's like, look, I plant my flag way the fuck over there on the horizon, and I make you negotiate from that position. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. Is if we plant our flag at,
Okay. Yeah.
well, states' rights and secession, we're now negotiating from that point. Do you see what I'm saying? So if we plant our flag at, no, absolutely fucking furthest evolution of power possible, and we're going to build it, and we're not going to ask you permission, now we're negotiating from that point. You see what I mean? So
I get what you're saying.
we always have to be planting our flag at the furthest point on the horizon and making our adversaries negotiate from us from that point. Whereas if we start our position at states' rights or whatever the thing as like even a midway goal, then we're already negotiating from that point. We've already ceded ground to our, I don't want to call them enemies. Yeah, enemies, adversaries. We've already ceded that much ground. So now we're negotiating from that point, and the compromise is going to be somewhere between that and where we are now, and that then we haven't really achieved anything.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I guess as far as decentralization, I guess one other thing I do think about decentralization. We're all mostly Americans listening to this, but even if you're not, I think this certainly applies. It's just my experience of this is sort of with American politics and history, is that I do think that. So I do think that at the large scale, centralized national level, and in a heavily bureaucratized government, and this could be anywhere. Um, a certain classes of people, certain personality types, and certain ideological preferences do prosper and flourish in that environment. And I think those tend to be personalities and ideology and stuff that I dislike. So it's sort of that capital P progressive. I tend to just group progressives historically together. The old progressives are the new progressives, which is different with different aesthetics on top of the a different what's the word in Marxist theory, superstructure on top of the same basic ideas. Um, and the types of personality types. I think, like, the careerists, the ladder climbers, the brown nosers. I just tweeted something about this. The people that like the bureaucrats, the power hungry bureaucrats, the technocrats, the people, the control freaks, various personality types. The people that like to affirm their, like, it's the brown noses. People like to affirm what their bosses believe and back that up, and yeah, I don't like the kind of people. I like the people who flourish in a marketplace. I like people that are generally entrepreneurial. I like the people who are, dynamic and innovative, and have good ideas. I don't like the people that are control freaks or teachers' pets, or cops in the sense that I use the word, which I tend to not even say it's the police are the worst ones, but the zoning commission, the school teachers, perhaps, and definitely school administrators. I think that in some cases these structures, and as you go up larger and larger in scale and in complexity of, like, the administrative state, it does encourage both bad ideologies that I don't like, cultural ideas that I don't like, that conflict with my own personal cultural preferences and my own, associates' cultural preferences, and probably just objectively bad cultural preferences in some cases, but not a cultural criticism podcast, and bad personality types, really, that I think that the marketplace produces much better personality types and character, allows people in general with a lot better personality types and character succeed than the kind of people that succeed in kind of, large scale bureaucratic government, or like lobbying those government entities. So, I mean, that's kind of also another way that I look at the whole issue, separate from whether, like, decentralization is just a good idea, and in terms of liberty, which I think is an indirect correlation.
No, I mean, I more or less agree with everything that you just said, and actually, I think we should kind of wrap it up here. But no, I definitely agree mostly with what
I
you
don't
just
have much to
said.
say about Texas, so it's not
Yeah.
going to be a civil war. So yeah, that's fine.
You don't think a civil war is coming?
Well, I will say with this, and let you go on. With Trump, I'm definitely voting for him in the primary. It's like an open primary. You don't have to-
Really? Okay.
Oh, yeah. You can just vote for whichever one you want to. I think you can show up and just vote for whichever one. Yeah, I want to see Trump go all the way through. I want to see that whole constitutional crisis, extended constitutional.
Oh, you
crisis
just want to see
happen.
the shit hit the fan.
I mean, I'm with
circus.
Trump for the process. I'm with Trump for the process. I mean, completely separately from this. I mean, we're trying to dump Biden. I want Muslims to dump Biden over the Palestine thing, and their usual unconditional support of Democrats. Blah blah blah, whatever.
Yeah.
Then they really should, honestly. But
Yeah.
people that don't know my political fundamentals, I'm like, dude, you don't understand how little I'm willing to ever support or even tolerate a Nikki Haley or a Rob DeSantis.
Listen, but Trump is he's a Lakudnik too. He recognized Jerusalem, for fuck's sake.
He did, and
He's
I'm not
BB's
holding out
boy.
for him to move left of Biden. Well, I don't know about that, and people say that, but I'm not counting on any of these hypotheticals.
Right.
Whether he's willing to go left of Biden on Israel, but he was. I don't care about Trump being president. First of all, I want to see him. I want to see the extended constitutional crisis. But there's more of a chance of him changing his position. He met with Kim Jong-un. I mean, there's more of a chance of him doing something different. I mean, he's the only guy that will even consider doing anything different than this. Everybody else is literally running on, I am the most status quo person that will change the least. Please vote for me, boomers.
Right.
That is literally the campaign of the rest of the people. It's like, I will keep things the same and keep things stable as much as possible. But that's secondary. I want to see Trump not be disqualified, because when you have someone that's even as much of an outsider as Trump, which obviously there's no way a real genuine outsider is getting anywhere near that. He's a unicorn because of his insane levels of name recognition he came into the game with, and money.
He's not so let me push back. He's not an outsider. He's like that. He's an insider, but he's like that crazy rich cousin that is flamboyant and obnoxious that the rest of the family doesn't like. That's what he is.
Yes. Yes.
He's
And
he's like the shitty rich cousin who just acts like an asshole, and your rich old parents don't really like it. That's who he is.
yes,
It's not
but
any
he's
kind of
like
outsider.
yes, but he represents a test of like what if someone is kind of an outsider. You know what I remember? I'm not saying he's the outsider. I'm saying he is the closest thing you can get to an outsider to get as far as he did. I mean, the situation he's did, and then to run against Hillary Clinton, which is a huge L for the Democratic Party, but to and actually to win the presidency, and just to see what happens when somebody who's just not part of the the plan, the DC consensus is in there, and how much they've absolutely flipped their lid and engage in what they engaged in. Which, by the way, is my other argument for Trump, which is that he's not going to do anything crazy to you, minorities or whoever that think that Trump's going to be a fascist dictator. He was our president for 4 years, and he couldn't do anything because the whole system kind of runs itself. I hope you don't think Biden even knows what the government is doing,
what's going on
at any given
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And that's a flex. That's a flex of the deep state, which again, like, you know how many people will just roll your eyes if you even bring up the deep state, the very real deep administrative state. It's a flex. The president doesn't even have to know where he is half the time, and is constantly on whatever. I mean, he's barely cognizant and coherent at any given time, and the whole government can administer itself because it's completely self-contained and runs on its own interest. And Trump isn't going to be able to accomplish any crazy fantasies of him, becoming a fascist dictator. So I'm not really worried about that, nor is he particularly competent. so I'm not really too worried about that. I'm here for the chaos, since a bunch of people tend to want it anyway.
This is my ideal outcome, is they both get the nomination, and then they're at the debates, and they both have a stroke and fall over and die into their own pudding. You know what I mean? So, and then somebody ships them off to both off to an old folks home, and they both tell them that they're running the country. You know what I mean? And then we just go about our business. That's my ideal situation.
Well, I would love to go about our business, but instead, who's next in line for these parties and these organizations, the speakers.
Isn't he gonna fucking have Nikki Haley as a vice president? Isn't that?
Well, I won't vote for. I won't vote for him. If Nikki Haley was the president of the United States, I seriously I don't. Not it's not a promise. But
she's like a Hillary Clinton. Should be World War fucking III.
I'm going to become an insurrectionary anarchist if Nikki Haley. I will not live in a country run by Nikki Haley. I just find that person absolutely the most despicable person in politics, as far as I'm concerned. No, absolutely not. No, it's basically her, and she's the new Hillary Clinton, just the most absolutely despicable person,
the worst on everything.
Attain the presidency, and of course, someone who a great litmus test for someone who considers we can say this about Clinton, but someone who considers Nikki Haley to be a reasonable alternative to Trump. Well, if you're a person just typically a Democrat, or someone that's just centrist and essentially a Democrat, if a centrist Democrat, if you're a person who thinks that Nikki Haley is a reasonable alternative to having Donald Trump as president, that's I don't know. I cannot begin to discuss the world with you. We don't see the world through the same lenses whatsoever. No, I cannot live in a country. I cannot live in a country governed by, with Nikki Haley as the president at all.
No, yeah, she's particularly awful. She is a kind of a Hillary Clinton, but in the Republican Party.
She's owning it. She's owning it. She's absolutely owning it, and she represents the very worst people, the sensible moderates that I can't stand.
Yep. Well, on that note, I hope it is a giant shit show, so I can at least point and laugh, and then I don't know, keep going about my own business. But let's wrap it up here. You got anything else, real quick?
No, well, it was a pleasure.
This was fun.
I had a lot to get off. I honestly had a lot to get off my chest. about recent events. We haven't done one of
Well,
these in a while, so
well,
it was fun.
you heard it here, folks. Penguins endorsing Trump 2024.
I think I did it in one of the panels too, but yo, I can't wait to see. I can't wait to see what happens. Whether
I did not
he
see
wins
this
from
coming, but
prison,
yeah.
whether he wins from prison, or I hope he doesn't go to prison. But that's a weird thing. That's weird. But I hope they keep trying to take him off ballots when he's winning pretty good in a lot of demos in a lot of states. I want to see what happens when they try to tell people that, yeah, you actually can't vote for this guy. He's too bad to be the president. I want to see what happens to a democracy and the idea of voting in general. You know what I mean? I think it's putting it to the test. Like, can you vote for a bad person? I like the idea of asking. I honestly running by the American political system. Can you be allowed to vote for a bad person? Because that's what this basically is, and a lot of people want to say no.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. It'll be funny to watch. But all right, well, this is a blast, man. Everybody, be excellent to each other, and we'll see y'all next time. Peace.
Take care, guys. Ciao.